Hi everyone, and welcome to Youth Amplified.
A podcast that inspires, empowers, and connects. I'm Brian.
And I'm Ronna. And in the spotlight today, remembering or repeating, rethinking ANZAC for a new generation.
We're delighted to be joined around the table by Hadiya, Mason, Yusuf, and former US Marine Sergeant Major and motivational speaker, Max Garcia. Such an engaging panel, Ronna, from the look of it, so let's get right in.
Let's do that. Hadiya, let's start with you. When you think, or when you hear the word ANZAC, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you personally?
Well, I think being a young person, when I hear the word ANZAC, I'm just instantly reminded of the just unfathomable amount of young people, men and women, who enlisted to fight in the war and who sacrificed their youth, their livelihoods, their health. And I'm instantly reminded of a story actually that I heard a few years ago when I was in Canberra at the War Memorial. And it was the story of a soldier who had forged his age, and he was 15 years old and he joined the war efforts. And reading the letters that he had written back to his mother and his family, it's fundamentally impossible for us to understand and put ourselves in the positions of those people. And so when I hear ANZAC, I'm just reminded of the unappreciated service that goes into enlisting at such a young age, and that goes into fighting at such a level, putting your life at such risk. And I just think that needs to be recognized more.
Excellent, thank you.
Too true. Now, Mason, why do you think remembrance is still important in today's world?
Well, I think remembrance is important because it's remembering those who have fallen in battles, but also those who have served on, say, peacekeeping operations, those who have served at home. But also it's about keeping those stories intact, because if you don't know exactly where you come from, you may struggle to find an identity within yourself or your country.
Max, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, Brian, was I think that we all need to remember that freedom is not free, but instead freedom is paid for on the backs and lives of service members, past, present, future, as well as the families that support them.
Yusuf, let's move on to you. Are young Australians genuinely remembering the past, or at risk of just repeating rituals without deeper understanding?
I believe younger people tend to view ANZAC more distantly because I personally think peace and diplomacy is more important than talking about conflict. And that's the thoughts that have been changing through the generations. So all the generations tend to view ANZAC as a unifying national story and tend to tie it to something that's uniquely Australian and just part of our national identity.
Now, Max, you've been a part of so many ANZAC Day ceremonies through the years. What do you think is sometimes missing in how, ANZAC is talked about today?
Yeah, well, the one thing I made it a point to speak about whenever I spoke at Camden ANZAC Day a few years ago is that we should keep in mind that the sacrifices made by those ANZAC warriors, harsh conditions, oftentimes without food, or nothing but crackers, onion, in the mud, in the rain. They never had a fluffy, flat white coffee to help them get started. But the one thing I always make it a point to emphasize is that we should keep in mind that their sacrifices, especially those who were killed in action, that their sacrifices were not in vain. Because one thing that we forget to mention often at all these ANZAC Day celebrations that I always mention is that their legacy lives on through their successors. Because a lot of those ANZAC warriors, as much as they were under brutal conditions, literally watching the guy next to them get blown to pieces, or having to stab someone in the heart or in the neck or whatever with a bayonet, many of them immediately, when World War II came, without hesitation, volunteered to go back to World War II. And then, and they trained those who trained eventually, what would be next? The Korean War veterans, the Vietnam veterans, Iraq, Afghanistan. So their legacy lives on all the way to the modern warrior right now.
So true.
Yes. Now, Mason, is questioning ANZAC seen as disrespectful or necessary for it to stay relevant?
That's a bit of a tougher one, but I think it depends how and what you're questioning. Because if you question it, say, in a way that is demeaning to the service of these people, then yeah, it definitely can be taken as disrespect. But I think when particularly young people start questioning these things, that keeps some relevance.
Now, Hadiya, what do you think? Can we honor soldiers while still critically questioning the whole thing, the wars that they fought in?
Look, wars are created by politicians and by the systems around people. Wars aren't necessarily created by soldiers, they're not created by society. I think we can appreciate the soldiers who fought very, very bravely in World War I, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars. But at the same time, we can question the social and political conditions that gave way to that specific war and to then the war afterwards. And so I think it's important, and it's actually crucial that we question the political choices and the conditions that led to that. But I believe that for that exact reason, it necessitates us honoring the soldiers who actually served in those forces, because again, it just reinforces the idea that the politicians of that time created wars while it was the innocent and very brave civilians across the world who served.
Max, over to you. Are we doing enough to acknowledge the trauma and true cost of war beyond heroism?
That's a great question. And I'll say no, I don't think so. If I'm being completely honest with you, especially since we're talking about teenagers, if I'm being really honest, I feel like that a lot of times our focus is in the wrong direction on things that don't matter. Since we're talking teenagers, and my kid's a teenager. I have a girl who's turning 16 next month. Don't remind me. And I haven't come to grips with that just yet. And I'm hearing things like this. We're taking the time out to entertain kids who want to identify themselves as animals, right? We're taking the time out to authorize protests at the most iconic landmarks in Australia. Protests over things that Australia has zero control over. We're entertaining this. Meanwhile, while we're entertaining this, another veteran is committing suicide, or our enemy somewhere in some other country is preparing very well for the next war, while we're focusing on these other things that, in my opinion, don't matter.
Yeah.
Yusuf, what do you think? Does ANZAC Day leave room for conversations about peace, or does it mainly focus on conflict?
ANZAC Day does leave room for peace, but most stories that I've heard personally going to dawn services and Remembrance Day drives and stuff, they mostly still focus about heroism, conflict, and courage and sacrifice. And so I believe there should be a balance between both sides, especially talking about war and the need for peaceful resolutions. So, yeah.
Mason, what do you think? Are we remembering the full story, including Indigenous and non-European soldiers?
In my opinion, no, not really. But then again, ANZAC Day is uniquely Australian. So you've got to remember that a lot of people that, I would say at least 98% of soldiers who fought in World War I, particularly for Australia, or in Australia's uniform, I should say, were of European, say Irish, English, Welsh descent. So a lot of, say, even Indigenous soldiers probably not getting the recognition that they deserve. There was a lot of Indigenous soldiers that fought in the First World War very bravely in a lot of cases, and they earned plenty of accolades for that. But there was the first time that I know of that we started really considering Aboriginal or Indigenous soldiers for leadership roles in the military was, well, in Australia anyway, was in 1944 when our first Indigenous officer was commissioned. And also you got to remember that there's also American forces that fought in that war as well. Although not directly tied to Australia, they still have a story that needs to be told.
And moving from there, Yusuf, from that, how do you think young people could actually live ANZAC values beyond ceremonies or, beyond this one day?
young people could live Anzac values every day, not just on Anzac Day, by doing simple things like acts of kindness that can go a long way, like standing up for what you believe is right, being courageous, standing up for your mate when something's wrong. And those, in such simple ways, we can actually fulfill Anzac values in every day of our lives.
I want to bring Max on this as well. What do you think, Max?
I would say one of the simple things, and this happens a lot in the U.S., is that in the U.S., it's very common we see somebody who has served at any point in time, especially if you see someone in uniform, just to say, hey, thank you for your service. You know, if you're at the bar, hey, let me buy you a beer. Thank you for your service. That goes a long way because it's very easy to forget that these people are signing their name to the dotted line saying that they will sacrifice their life at any given time for our freedom that we pretty much take for granted. Myself included, I'm just as guilty. You know, our freedom to meet with who we want to meet, where we want to meet, talk about whatever we want to talk about, go on vacation wherever we want to go on vacation, to what school we want to go to, where we want to live, the whole 9 yards is all provided by those warriors.
Hadiya, if you could reshape how Anzac is remembered, what would you keep and what would you change?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I believe the way that Anzac is portrayed, it definitely differs as you grow up. And I think the one thing I would change about the way that we celebrate Anzac Day is that we're not necessarily looking at these Anzac warriors as victims. They should be remembered through the courage and through the insane bravery that they displayed, and also through the compassion that they had for each other, the camaraderie, the kindness that they showed to each other, just the level of respect that they had for the values that they were upholding. And so we talked briefly about Indigenous Australians being recognised, and I do definitely think that needs some more recognition, particularly in the sense that while statistically there may not have been as many Indigenous soldiers commissioned in World War I as other soldiers, the way that they were treated when they got back to Australia, they still weren't allowed to vote. We still saw a lot of disrespect institutionally.
Segregation.
A lot of segregation, yeah. So definitely incorporating that narrative and just recognizing that while we are proud of the Anzacs and we're proud of the country that they defended and the ideas that they defended, because of that specific reason, it you know, preludes to the condition that we take accountability for the fact that the transgressions that were committed against them were still a thing. And so when we remember the Anzacs, we remember them for their kindness, their bravery, their camaraderie, and we also acknowledge the fact that they were inherently in a system that was mistreating them when they came back.
Well, first of all, I love it. I love the one thing that I really admire about Australia is every year, this whole Anzac Day celebration, people are getting their kids up at the crack of dawn or even earlier than that to make the dawn service. I love this kind of thing. So I would keep that. It sounds simple, but even just getting up that early, just that one day a year is so painful. But it reminds me of the sacrifices they made. They didn't get 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep every night and then to go fight their fight. So I'm a little tired, I'm a little hungry. I like that one day of sacrifice, getting up early. And I mentioned briefly earlier, if I could change something, it would be to somehow link their sacrifices to their successors today. Because we should really keep in mind that their sacrifices were not in vain. Their legacy lives on proudly, and immediately starting in World War II, and then carrying on through all the other wars, Korean War, Vietnam.
All the conflicts, really. Not
all the conflicts, all of them, you know. Papua New Guinea, East Timor, for Australia specific, Iraq, Afghanistan, too many places to list.
Well, we could continue this conversation for so long.
Oh, yeah.
But of course, everything comes to an end, and we'd love to thank you, Hadiya, Mason, Yusuf, and Max for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
Till next fortnight, let's continue to inspire, to empower, and connect. And remember, your voice matters.